The student movement, Cosas, led a large group of pupils to the JSE to ask for listed companies to support poor pupils. They say R1 billion must be donated towards basic education. For more on this, we are joined by Cosas spokesperson Douglas Ngobeni, as well as the Johannesburg Stock Exchange Marketing Director, Vuyo Lee. Thank you both so much for your time, and I think it's so important that we both have you on the show together. Let's start with you, Douglas. What exactly are your demands, and why are you specifically asking this from listed companies?
No, thank you, and we greet you from the Black and White Army, or on behalf of the Congress of South African Students. First, I have to mention that we find it very disrespectful for the eNCA to be invited to the march which we conducted at JSE on Friday, and they decide not to come, and then they invite us later. But nevertheless, we did exactly that. We marched to the JSE on Friday, and prior to that, we met with the executives of the JSE, Usisi Vuyo Lee, and we explained what is the intention of our march to the JSE. And it is quite clear that these mega companies in South Africa are not playing an active role in trying to better the conditions of learning in South Africa. Our quest in the JSE was very simple, to say the JSE listed companies, with an understanding, of course, that the JSE is a market regulator of all these companies. These companies must play an active role immensely in trying to contribute to the development of education, particularly in terms of learners who are transiting from lower to higher education, learners whose parents are unable to make ends meet. And we marched to the JSE, of course, and we were welcomed. There were no hassles. It was not a war. We're not fighting with the JSE. It has been a very good exercise, and we have submitted our memorandum, of course, a memorandum which is a follow-up to this 2016 memorandum which was submitted by the Congress of South African Students to the JSE. And this time around, at least the CEO came and accepted our memorandum, and we are having a common ground, because we all know that our democracy is built on some level of capital greed. And these big companies are not playing a pivotal role in trying to assist our learners. And the JSE has also mentioned that our companies, the companies which are listed in our institutions, are giving bursaries to a lot of learners in South Africa, whatsoever. But our argument now is that these bursaries are only given to top achievers. What about those who are not able to see the entrance door of universities? These ones who are not top achievers, these ones who are likely to be artisans and the likes. So the JSE has accepted our memorandum, and it will be very, very premature for the JSE to announce live on television now.
Okay, sorry, Douglas, I have
responding to our memorandum, because
I have to interject there because we don't have much time, and I just want to correct you there. There is no disrespect for us not covering the story on Friday. This is why we're covering it now extensively, and we've dedicated this segment to having you as well as the JSE on. I want to ask Vuyo, with regards to the acceptance of this memorandum, how did you receive this memorandum, and what is going to be considered from the list of demands?
Thank you very much, Heidi, and good evening, viewers of eNCA. Heidi, on Friday, we received a memorandum from Mr. Tebogo Magafane, together with Douglas, the national spokesperson of Cosas. About 1,500 students marched to the JSE building, requesting that the listed entities to contribute towards furthering education. We do believe that it is a good issue to engage us on. It is a critical matter because funding of tertiary education is a challenge. And what we had undertaken to do is confer internally to see what role we can play in assisting and return to Cosas with a response on in 14 days. So we'll be able to have a view of the different aspects of the memorandum that were presented to us and whether we can assist in any way. There were other things that were outside of the memorandum that were requested at the march, and those included, looking at how we can support learners and learners in basic education, and those we'll also consider.
Unfortunately, we've actually lost Douglas, and I wanted to pose this question. We actually are trying to get him back, but I wanted to pose this question to him, Vuyo, and perhaps you can just shed some light on this. A lot of the responsibility lies on government to provide these bursaries, to provide the necessary support, especially for those that just do not have the means to pay for higher education, and we do know it's a very costly affair. Is there any possibility that these listed companies that Cosas is asking for provide the support? Is it really possible, or does the responsibility solely lie on government to provide the necessary means and measures to support students who need funding to study further?
Heidi, I think it's recognized that there are many challenges in South Africa, and education is one of them. And that it is not only the role of government, but also the role of social partners and organizations to contribute. So I think what we do need to do is think, how can government and the private sector work together to address these challenges? I don't agree with Douglas's view that corporates are not doing anything. I do think absolutely corporates in different ways and structures are looking at ways to support education, particularly access to education and access to free education. Granted, there are some programs that they run that look at bursaries. There are also programs that they run that look at providing education for existing staff members, as indicated in their memorandum. But is it enough? I suppose there is a question to say what more can be done. It would be nice if we find ourselves in a space where free education is provided to all, and I suppose it's quite important that we engage on a sustainable solution.
Just another reminder, we are trying to get Douglas back, but we're not succeeding there. So, Vuyo, I guess it's just you and me. Let's just try and keep this going. I want to touch on a point that you mentioned with regards to what you said you disagree with Douglas, where you think that business is doing enough. And I pose this question to you, do you think business should be doing more? Because Douglas touched on an important point where he said that a lot of the time bursaries and funding is awarded not all the time, but most of the time, to high achievers. And sometimes you might find somebody that's not a high achiever, but has ambitions to study a specific subject or a specific course or degree, and they actually do really well in that, but they weren't afforded an opportunity to get that bursary or funding because they weren't a high achiever. Do you think that needs to be really looked at and possibly considered?
Yes, Heidi, I do think that there is always a question of whether business can do more. And it is a reality that the education challenge is very great. And perhaps businesses can move towards thinking about what more they can do to contribute. There are different structures that corporate actually embarks on to support education at a tertiary level. They do look at TVETs, they look at artisan school, they look at also bursaries. Some of the bursaries, for example, at the JSE, we don't look necessarily at academic excellence. We look at the means test, whether students and their families are able to afford. And as long as they do receive a bachelor's pass, as the JSE, we do support students at a particular household income level. So there are different mechanisms to support, and not necessarily only top achievers, but also students who come with a bachelor's pass, who also qualify to go into universities, and those also who do not qualify and can go into technical colleges and the likes. Absolutely, engagement must happen all the time to see whether more can be done. There's always more that can be done. The question is, how do we build a sustainable solution for this?
Great. We actually do have Douglas back on the line. Unfortunately, he didn't hear some of those questions. But Douglas, let me ask you this final question to end off the conversation. I asked Vuyo the same thing, where a lot of the responsibility lies on government to provide bursaries, to provide funding. We've seen the fees must fall, protests that have happened year after year. Do you not think that a lot of the responsibility should stay with government, or are you definitely calling for more of the private sector to try and help with funding and bursaries for students?
No, thanks. And I sincerely apologize for the technical glitch. I really appreciate that question, but in responding to it, we will understand that we are a country which is built on some sort of, I mean, we have got a bad history as South Africa, and as South Africans, you know, we're more interested in making babies than playing an active role in developing ourselves. So what is important in this regard is the fact that both the government and the private sector should try to coexist. We know that it is already happening, but our government, you look at the population, you look at the rate of unemployment and everything else, you will be able to see that the government alone cannot do it, whereas there are people who are benefiting directly from the people. I mean, where I stay, there is ShopRite. That ShopRite is not giving, is not even buying school shoes, is not even buying sanitary towels or donating to any child who's underprivileged in my community. So both government and the private sector should play an active role and coexist in that regard, so that we are able to create a better society at the end of the day. We cannot say that there are companies which are benefiting from our communities, and these companies, the only thing they're interested in is profit. So we need to go to the root of our problems, and then we are able to solve them from there. We are not necessarily saying that it must only be the private sector which contribute, but both government is already overloaded. Government deals with all the sectors already. Private is already a sector on its own. Private must play a role in the public so that we are able to coexist. Because we know, I'm the one who buys, like now, my data was finished. I just bought it from Telkom. Telkom must contribute to the education of South Africa. I'm the consumer of the services of Telkom.
Yes, so I'm so sorry, Douglas. We've actually completely run out of time, but a very important conversation. And I do think, you know, the private sector should definitely try and help with regards to funding those students who desperately need funding to study further. Thank you so much. That was Cosas spokesperson Douglas R1bn, as well as the marketing director, rather, at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, Vuyo Lee.